Hey, I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, and I recently sat down with Ab Atkins, Senior Vice President with KDC, and Brian Lowen, Executive Managing Director with Newmark Knight Frank. And we talked about powered shells and how they're changing the data center industry today. So here's that conversation. Hope you enjoy it. Hey, I'm David Liggett with Data Center Hawk, focused on cloud and colocation, data center industry trends, the dynamic market. Well, guys, very excited to be with you this morning. Thanks for joining us. We are in KDC's office here in Dallas, Texas. So, Ab, thanks for hosting us.
Glad to have you.
So, I'd love to start out with your experience in the data center industry. You know, actually, it's very fun. We've known both of you for a very long time. But, Ab, maybe let's start with you. Talk about your background in the industry, obviously coming up through the real estate business, but focusing on data centers and what that has been like over the last several years.
So back in 2007, I got a call from Toby Grove, who's president of KDC, who said he had a good idea, and that was the data center business, because building large office projects, campus facilities, they really seen for the past 30 years that the servers were leaving these big campuses, and they were going somewhere. And so because they had a good interface with the people that were behind it, they thought that would be a good business to pursue. So he called me, because at that time I was building warehouses. I looked at it and thought, this is the warehouse of the future. And so that was back in 2007. Prior to that, I was with Arthur Andersen in Houston in management consulting right after college, and we did systems installations for the big petro companies. So I had a little bit of a rendezvous with the IT world, a little bit.
Sure.
But my background is really real estate.
Sure, that's great. And then Brian, you've been with Newmark now for a long time, but talk about your role leading that practice and your background in the space and what you're focused on today.
Sure, yeah. Actually, I got in the industry in the 90s kind of as an engineer in the telecom side. Worked in several different roles. Actually, at one point, we acquired the 350 Cermak building in Chicago, had the management rights to 1 Wilshire and 60 Hudson. So I was involved in the 90s era data centers. And then on the acquisition side, just saw the inefficiency. So eventually in, I think, 2004, when we sold our company, I saw the inefficiencies, went to the brokerage side, and kind of been on the brokerage side since then. But since from Newmark, we've really grown our platform quite a bit in the last decade. We've started off as a private company when I came over. We're now a very large publicly traded firm with over 400 offices globally. We've got a lot of different aspects to the data center piece. We try to be more consultative in our approach than just truly brokerage, which has opened up a lot of opportunities for us in the banking side, the real estate side. Working with both tenants, landlords, and the finance part of the world. So it's been a pretty good run here. Yeah.
Well, so Ab, you brought up jumping into the development, the data center development world in 2007, and Brian, you're just talking about your engineering days prior to that. This industry has changed so much in the last 10 to 15 years. We've seen really trends move from companies owning and operating their own data centers all across the U.S. and all across the world, to taking that infrastructure and placing it with data center operators and actually leasing the infrastructure, now to putting infrastructure into cloud scenarios where they can reduce some of their upfront costs and it be more of an operating model. But Ab, you all have spent the last 12, 15 years focused on the development side of data centers. You've done it not just here in Dallas, but in cities across the U.S. Maybe hit on location, of how location plays into your thought process on where as a developer you want to put an asset, and just maybe talk about the things you think through when you're thinking about the where of where a data center project is.
Right. So we're really focused primarily in Dallas, although we develop for clients, all over the country, really wherever they want to go. And of course, as people know, in the data center industry, you have different drivers for different markets. And so it really kind of depends on, who your clients are and where they're really spending, their time and where they want you to be. So the short answer is we'll go anywhere. My experience has been in Ashburn, Virginia, and mainly in Texas and in Kansas, where we've followed some clients. And so that's really more on the national scale. On the local scale, whether it be Kansas or Dallas or Ashburn, Virginia, the key is to really understand your client's requirement, their densities, their redundancies, and what kind of design do they like, what's their fault tolerance, et cetera. But obviously you want to find the best site, with the best infrastructure.
Sure.
And in our opinion, with the project we've got going right now in Richardson, having a location that's clustered within a very, very accepted, high-tech quarter per se, it provides a warm and fuzzy, for people who are looking, especially those who are coming in from out of state. It alleviates any cognitive dissonance, for am I making the right decision? So
yeah, and I always previously when I was helping tenants in the space, and Brian, similar to where you've spent some of your time, validation of $100 million, $200 million, $500 million decision is worth a lot. And so when you do have a location that has been accepted by other data center users, data center operators, and just other large tech companies, that's highly valuable. Brian, from your perspective, and we're going to spend some time today talking about powered shell development and how that trend has really infiltrated the market over the last 10 to 15 years. Brian, talk about from a user perspective. And what I want to do is maybe from your perspective, I want to talk about some of the advantages that a data center user would have at looking at a powered shell facility versus one that is fully completed. And then Ab, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the mindset on what it's like to build those powered shells and how that's changed over the last 10 to 15 years. So Brian, from your standpoint, how do users view that, and what are some of the advantages of the powered shell concept?
So the powered shells, it's not for everybody. So what we have found is that in this day and age of hyperscale users, one of the longest lead times are the entitlements, getting the building put together. It takes 12 to 18 months oftentimes to kind of get the powered shell in place. So speed to market's important in this industry. One of the things that powered shells deliver is speed to market for these large users. It gives them a blank canvas in order to kind of build their own infrastructure inside the way they want it, but has the infrastructure in place, or it has the utilities brought to the site, the shells in place, and you have a 4 to 6 month kind of process of turnkey in and out in these situations. So we found that these powered shell sites are not for everyone, but for the operators, the hyperscalers, and even corporations who have very specific requirements, they make a lot of sense. So the turnkey environment on the other side is, it's there immediately. So having product in the market, if you need it, be co-located within a month or two. Having turnkey space is important. But again, not everybody's looking for that space, and we think it serves a portion of the marketplace having this infrastructure and the powered shell in place prior to the tenants entering the market.
Yeah, and certainly one of the things, and Brian, we were talking about this earlier, that we have seen in the data center space, in the last 5 years differently than we did, the previous 10 was really large infrastructure projects hitting the market and actually leasing those that infrastructure from owners themselves, not building it out for the company's own purposes. And Ab, you all have been building shells around some of those types of transactions now for a while. From your perspective, how has that changed? Brian brought up the ability to scale, flexibility, the speed to market. Those are all things that the powered shell concept delivers for the end user. But talk about doing that as a developer, and what are some of the things you all have learned from doing that the last 10 years?
Sure. Well, it provides flexibility. We've seen that truly evolve, over the last 10 years. I would say when we look back we did a dozen powered shells for a large publicly held third-party provider, REIT. And in the beginning, we saw their users were relatively small, and so the buildings had to be divisible, but they were mainly designed for a utility yard, pods per se, and admin and burn-in and load dock area. But as the years went by, we saw these tenants needed storage space, or they needed more office space, or they needed admin. And now we're at the point where they're saying we want amenities. And so I've seen a lot of the commoditization and evolution parallel what we see in our traditional office and industrial businesses, and that you have to provide more. So how do you get there? In our opinion, going after really the larger deal market, which I would say is probably 4 to 5 megs and up, those guys are going to want something more robust. They're going to want, for the most part, a higher wind resistancy than you see in some of the more multi-tenant visible buildings.
Yeah.
They also want the flexibility to go either low density or high density or variable. Same with redundancy. If you're going to build it out, you got to guess. Do I go in, two in, n plus one?
Yes.
And to change that after the fact is easier said than done. And so as Brian was saying, we have seen the speed to market become more focused on actually finding a good site with great infrastructure, getting entitled and building, the shell building, which I call the chassis. And then the engine can literally be built off-site and then inserted in, depending on whether you're talking hyperscale or third party, et cetera. But that part is taking less and less time, and it's done off-site. So we really like the flexibility of being able to go after, as Brian was saying, hyperscale, third party providers, and enterprise users. And so if you start here at the baseline powered shell, then you have the opportunity to lease, sell, JV, whatever, with any of those 3 main slices of the wedding cake.
Yeah.
So as Ab mentioned, these chassis can actually be used for a lot more than just a single data center operator that we've thought about for the last decade. We've seen users come across that are lab requirements that may say, we've got 10 megawatts of lab that doesn't fit inside of a traditional data center, but would work very nicely inside of a powered shell. And we've also seen the Bitcoin pricing again stay above 10,000 for the last several months, and we're starting to see an influx of these cryptocurrency miners coming back in as well. These cryptocurrency miners, again, are not looking for turnkey data center space. They're looking for a space that has access to a lot of power at low cost and an infrastructure building that can house these.
Yeah.
So again, having the chassis as an apt example kind of be in place and the engine being built or brought in separately allows for that customization and flexibility that a powered shell offers to the marketplace.
Yeah, and it's really something that the data center industry has been chasing. If you think about the last 10 years of development, and if you're in the space like deep, you would understand from a redundancy perspective. But if you think about electrically at 2N, that traditionally was a standard for a tier 4 data center. And I would say 5 to 7 years ago, we started to see that kind of slide into the tier 3 plus model. But the advantage, as you mentioned, that the powered shell facility gives a user is the customization approach. And for it's not for everyone, but for those companies that find value there, that flexibility is really important. Ab, and I know you all have put some flexible standards within your design right now that allows for customers to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Take, for instance, the utility yard. We developed a dozen buildings for a client, and as they standardized their design on the inside and the outside, they decided to use mechanical really on the roof, and so they shortened the depth of their utility yards to, in some cases 85, 90 feet. And for a powered shell that we're doing, or we would do really anywhere else, we would want it to be bigger. Not that that's a bad design, but we want the flexibility to bring that mechanical back down on the yard. But on top of that, as Brian was mentioning the crypto business, if somebody wants an enormous amount of power, and if you're tapped out at a substation or with your feeders or whatever, if you have, and we're talking about location again, if you're located underneath or near a transmission line, which our project here is, we can drop power directly down from the 138 kV, set our own transformer, and give them power, additional power, virtually unlimited. Well, you're geometrically limited to your utility yard for the infrastructure you can put in there, and then you've got power at transmission rates that is very competitive, especially in a place like Dallas.
Yeah.
So it's that flexibility of giving the tenant the ability to dictate their mechanical, their electrical, their admin, storage, office, amenities, fitness centers. Goes on and on.
Depends on the user and how they value that for sure. Let's talk about the project real quick, because it is in Richardson, which is a suburb of the Dallas market. But kind of give us an overview of what you're developing there today and when you believe you'll be bringing it online and what it looks like moving forward.
Sure. Well, not to turn this into an infomercial,
Sure.
but we've got a 130,000 square foot powered shell building. We're building it to 190 mile per hour wind resistancy. And we're doing that because we have seen, and really a lot in just the last 2 or 3 years, our clients are saying, we understand that you've built 30 warehouses in Dallas and they're FM, as low as FM I-60 to I-90 to 120, and they haven't fallen down. But the weather is getting pretty unpredictable, and we don't want to be that first warehouse / data center that takes a big fall from a weather event. So it may cost you 10 to 20% more of a premium to beef up the structure, but we find, especially given what I've seen in the past in dealing and developing for third-party providers, the big deals, and especially the big financials, they are really concerned about that, and we develop for our own clients that are in that space. So we would rather err towards something a little bit more robust than not. So we're doing that, and then we have a 30,000 square foot, I'll call it an office pod in the front. The first level is for office, admin, loading, burn-in, everything that's needed to receive clients and customers, at the conference room area, in the reception area, to allowing the receiving of equipment, testing it, burning it in, et cetera. But upstairs, we're leaving a blank canvas for a company to put in storage, fitness center, et cetera, whatever amenities.
Sure.
And those are changing,
Yep.
or I won't say changing, they're being added by the day. So we think it's important to allow a user or a tenant or whomever ends up in the building that flexibility for whatever they want above the office area.
Yeah. And Brian, Newmark represents clients all over the world. You obviously know the U.S. very well, and Dallas. From a data center market perspective, why do users find this market attractive? And then how do you think the market is set to grow in the next several years?
Historically, Dallas and really most of Texas is on its own power grid. So the ERCOT power grid is separated from the 2 other main grids in the United States. So I think that in itself kind of brings some attention to the Texas market. The ERCOT grid has been managed very well historically. There's ample capacity now and really going into the future. We're starting to see a lot of wind energy and stuff being brought into the ERCOT grid. So the price of power in the deregulated markets like Dallas and Houston are very attractive on a national basis, probably the most attractive of any of the largest data center markets. So that combination in itself makes it good. But Texas, generally speaking, is a very pro-business marketplace.
Yeah.
So we found a lot of corporations tend to want to have presence in this market. And if you look back at the first half of 2019, the deals that have completed in Dallas, a lot of them it's across the spectrum. We've had a car manufacturer with some AI technologies that are required. We've seen hyperscale user being Facebook taking some large capacity in this market. LinkedIn has taken large capacity in the market. We've had a government entity take a large footprint in this market. So it's really across the spectrum. And then that dynamic has really been true for the last decade in this space. We haven't seen, unlike say Houston where it's very energy dependent, Dallas has been I think a large melting pot of a lot of different types of users, from the hyperscale users, a lot of operators, but a lot of corporate enterprise clients. And we think that trend is going to continue going forward.
Yeah, it's certainly a market that's set up to succeed from a cost perspective, from the competitive set that's here. It's a very competitive market, and one that you really have some of the best operators in the world that are delivering really great facilities that are being engineered and built the right way. So it's fun to see this market grow the way it has over the last several years. So, Ab, we've talked about Dallas and how that market has grown, but from your perspective, what are some of the changes that you've seen over the last 10 years in this market?
Well, I've seen the conversation shift from power as being the priority to the network, and what kind of fiber do you have to your site? How many carriers? How robust is it? And invariably over the past 10 years, we've seen it harder and harder to find sites that have everything you want, great power and great fiber. And as you move further out into the periphery of any given metroplex, and especially here, you can find sites and you can find power, but you may have just one or two carriers there. So then you're having to improvise to bring in the proper network, especially if you want to go after companies that are more carrier neutral. So that's been very interesting to see enterprise, third-party providers, and even the hyperscales who we've seen land in the periphery areas of the metroplex, how they sort through that healthy tension between fiber and power, and how that deals with location.
Yeah, and certainly just thinking about what users are, to your point, are communicating as their needs. I mean, the business speed, your ability to do different things with your infrastructure and how that impacts the business has just become so much more important. And then obviously that ties back into network maturity and in certain areas the network's more mature than others, and that definitely has a
There's a lot of things that
where
people are
users
just guessing about right now. What is the edge? What is the future of the data center? What does it look like, et cetera? But one thing that we know for certain is everybody wants it faster.
Yeah, that is true.
And so network is going to be important.
You bet. Ab, I want to talk real quick because one of the things we mentioned was trying to attract big users, and that a powered shell facility, one of the, I would say, advantages is that flexibility, but also just speed to market and kind of the supply chain, that you have the ability to bring the asset to the market quickly. One of the things KDC, a lot of people might not know this, but KDC has obviously a very large development arm outside of the data center business. How does that help you, and how does that help bring what you're doing from a data center perspective, supply chain wise, to the market in a quick manner?
Well, in the past 30 years, we've developed about $9 billion of commercial property across office, industrial,
that much,
data center. And I would say, believe it or not, half of that's probably just been in the past 5 to 7 years. So our work out there with all kinds of contractors is it's pretty robust. And so when you have, I won't say a grip, but when you have your tentacles that deep into the supply chain, it's very helpful. And so whether we're in a quick crunch need, or if we have the time to have a beauty contest where we will bid out projects, we always know not only who are the really good contractors, but we know even within the good contractor world who is available within that world that's really, really good. We know them really well. And a lot of our guys here that run our construction division are from that world. And so they know how that game is played. And that's very important.
Yeah, when you think back to doing this in 2007, 2008, 2009, and now doing it in 2019, are there differences between the two times when y'all were developing 12 facilities for a company versus what it's like today? Or is it pretty much the same? How do you see those two kind of time periods being the same or different?
Well, sometimes there's a reason for commodity spikes, and it can be, tariffs, or it can be, recessions or booms or whatever. A lot of times it's hard to really know because the supply chain is so extensive. But it vacillates. I would say it's probably a little bit more low beta now. It's not as jumpy because the cycle has been so long. I mean, this is really one of the longest growth cycles we've ever seen. So most of the really good contractors kind of have their system down and their people in place, and their vendors and their subcontractors locked down.
No, that makes sense. So one of the things I love to ask the people that we sit with, because you built your careers around this data center industry, which I think if we've learned anything over the last 10, 15, 20 years is it changes, and there's ebbs and flows to every market. But it certainly doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. But what makes you excited about this industry, this space, maybe some of the changes that are coming? I mean, what gets you excited about running Newmark's practice into the next 5, 10 years?
The technologies that are coming today. I mean, we see 5G coming out, Internet of Things, AI technologies that are out there. Those three buckets alone, the trillions of dollars that are being invested in that, the amount of data that's being created right now is vastly usurping all the data that's ever been created in mankind's history.
Yeah.
So what we're starting to see is a trend where this data is being created at rates that are just unprecedented from the past. And that data has to be stored somewhere.
Yep.
Now, where it's being stored is typically in a data center somewhere. How it's being processed is, it's changing.
Right.
So that part of our industry, the day and age of the corporations doing large multi-megawatt data centers and doing turnkey leases for a long period of time might be, a little bit in our rearview mirror.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean the data center industry is slowing down. I think we're actually accelerating into
Certainly.
the next decade.
Yeah.
It's just changing a little bit of the profile and dynamics of who's buying them, who's leasing them, and the types of facilities that are being built.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting things that I saw, or I think we all saw out of companies when they really started utilizing cloud. There were a lot of questions around how that would impact the, what we refer to as the co-location business, third-party leasing from data center REITs or privately owned companies, and it only accelerated. I mean, that changed the market when some of those larger hyperscale companies actually leased from the data center operators themselves, and it really changed the opportunity for the space. And it's one of the reasons you've seen such success with those developers is they've been able to adapt with the market and build to what the end user really wants today, and they've gotten a lot better at that. But Ab, what makes you excited about continuing to lead KDC's data center practice?
Well, you kind of touched on it, and that is as we have these nexuses of advancement. There are those who say, well, that's going to put this out of business or that out of business. But what it really does, for the most part, is it accentuates everybody's business.
Yeah.
And so, for example, back in the 80s when JIT first came out, and I was building warehouses, there was one group think that said, well, warehouses are going to be eradicated, retail malls are going to be gone, everything is going to be JIT, and all it did was it ushered in an era of logistics that just made everything boom.
Sure.
So people are talking now about edge, and what is the edge going to look like? Is it going to be infrastructure? Is it going to be a building?
Yeah.
Is it going to be a node, beneath a cell tower? What is it going to be? The answer is it's going to be a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so we at KDC just try to pick something that we think is sustainable, that makes sense, and it's well located, and has the largest target market, and stick with it.
Yeah.
But there's a tendency to want to go in one direction or another, with the advancement of technology. But the answer is it's going to be a whole lot of things.
Yeah, you bet. Well, and it's generally that's a really successful way to approach it. So, Ab, thanks for hosting us here. Brian, great to see you as always, and look forward to seeing y'all's businesses continuing to grow in the next few years.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.